The first sound was so soft that the orchestra never stopped playing. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't an explosion. It was a long, gentle scrape beneath my feet, like someone dragging a chair across a polished floor far below the ship, and almost everyone around me smiled, glanced toward the ceiling for a moment, then continued talking as though nothing had happened. I remember thinking that if this was the famous Titanic, the largest ship ever built, then surely nothing in the ocean could make it hesitate. I had repeated those words to myself for days because they made the voyage feel safe. My name will never appear in the history books. I wasn't rich enough to dine with the famous passengers, and I wasn't important enough to be photographed on the grand staircase. I was simply a 23-year-old steward's assistant who believed that a ship built by the greatest engineers in the world could not possibly fail. That night, I learned how quietly certainty can disappear. Earlier that evening, everything had felt ordinary. The dining rooms glowed with warm light. Children laughed as they chased one another through the corridors until their parents called them back, and the polished brass railings reflected faces filled with confidence. The crew had routines for everything. Every hallway had rules. Every passenger expected tomorrow to arrive exactly as planned. Looking back now, I think that confidence was the loudest sound on the ship because it drowned out every warning we were given. I had spent the afternoon helping carry luggage for a family traveling to America. The little boy asked me if I had ever seen an iceberg. I laughed and told him I hoped I never would, because that would mean it was too close. He laughed harder than I did, and I remember thinking how strange it was that children always believe adults know more than they really do. As the evening grew colder, I noticed something unusual. People stepping onto the open deck didn't stay outside for long. The air felt different. It wasn't windy. That was what made it unsettling. The ocean seemed to be holding its breath. Sailors often said that calm seas could fool a man more easily than rough ones, but I had never understood what they meant until that night. The water looked like black glass stretching endlessly beneath the stars. There were no waves breaking against the hull, no white foam, nothing moving except the ship itself. It was beautiful enough to make you forget that beauty sometimes hides danger instead of revealing it. A wireless operator hurried past me carrying papers. His expression looked tired rather than frightened. Another crewman mentioned ice warnings arriving throughout the day, but his voice carried no urgency. Warnings had become part of the routine. There were always reports from other ships. Someone always believed they had more time. Someone always believed another mile wouldn't matter. I returned to my duties convinced that experienced men knew exactly what they were doing. Then came that gentle scraping sound. At first nothing happened. Passengers looked around with curious smiles. Some joked that perhaps we had run over a whale. Others never even looked up from their conversations. A few minutes later I noticed something I couldn't explain. Crew members had begun walking faster without running. They spoke more quietly instead of louder. One officer passed me without making eye contact, which was unlike him. Confidence had been replaced by concentration, and somehow that frightened me more than panic would have. Panic has a shape. Silence does not. I was told to help passengers put on life jackets. Several people laughed when they saw them. One elderly gentleman refused at first because he said the jacket would wrinkle his coat. A young woman asked whether this was simply a drill. None of us answered directly because none of us truly knew what was happening. The ship still felt steady beneath our feet. The lights still glowed warmly overhead. The orchestra continued playing cheerful music somewhere above us. Nothing looked like disaster, and perhaps that is why so many people hesitated. We are taught to recognize danger by what we can see, but sometimes danger arrives wearing the face of normal life. As I moved through the corridors, I noticed another strange thing. The clock still ticked. The carpets still softened every footstep. Mirrors reflected calm, faces pretending everything would soon return to normal. It felt as though the ship itself was trying to convince us that nothing had changed. Then I reached a lower passageway where the air had become noticeably colder. A sailor closed a heavy door behind him with unusual care, almost respectfully. He caught my eyes for only a second before continuing on. He didn't need to explain anything. His face carried the answer. Water had entered places where water was never supposed to be. The realization spread through me more slowly than fear. I remember touching the polished wooden wall beside me, wondering how something so beautifully built could already be losing its battle against the sea. Orders became more frequent. Lifeboats were uncovered. Passengers gathered on deck wrapped in blankets over elegant evening clothes. Some still smiled for photographs. Others complained about the inconvenience of standing in the cold. Husbands reassured wives with confidence they no longer felt. Crew members repeated instructions over and over because familiar words helped hide unfamiliar uncertainty. The stars above us seemed brighter than I had ever seen before. Without city lights, the sky looked endless, almost close enough to touch. And for one strange moment, I found myself staring upward instead of toward the ocean. It occurred to me that the stars had watched thousands of ships cross these waters. They had seen confidence before. They had seen certainty disappear before. They would watch long after our voyage became memory. I helped a young mother fasten her daughter's life jacket. The little girl asked if they were going on a small adventure in the boats. Her mother smiled and said yes. It was the gentlest lie I have ever witnessed. Around us, people continued asking questions no one wanted to answer. How long would the delay last? Would breakfast still be served? Were they simply waiting for another ship? Every answer depended on hope because facts were arriving too slowly. I remember hearing one officer quietly say that the ship had been designed to survive damage to several compartments, but not as many as were now filling. He spoke like a man trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces kept changing. The lifeboats began lowering into the darkness. Watching them disappear was unsettling because after only a few moments they became impossible to see. The ocean swallowed shapes without making a sound. Looking over the rail felt like staring into an empty sky instead of water. There was no horizon anymore, only darkness meeting darkness. Time stopped behaving normally after that. Minutes stretched into hours, even though the cold kept reminding us that time was passing. More passengers accepted that something serious had happened, yet many still believed the ship itself would remain afloat until help arrived. After all, this was Titanic. Newspapers had called her practically unsinkable. Engineers admired her design. People trusted steel more than nature because steel was something humans could understand. Nature asked for no permission. I kept thinking about the scrape we had all dismissed. It seemed impossible that something so gentle could begin something so enormous. Perhaps that is how history often changes. Not with thunder, but with a quiet sound everyone explains away. Somewhere behind me, the orchestra continued playing. I never learned whether the musicians believed they would be rescued or whether they simply understood that calm can become a kind of courage. Their music floated across the freezing air, mixing with whispered prayers, nervous laughter, and the distant creaking of a ship carrying more weight than it could bear. Eventually, the deck no longer felt perfectly level. It was almost impossible to notice at first. A rolling marble revealed it better than any announcement could have. Someone accidentally dropped one near a staircase, and instead of stopping where everyone expected, it continued traveling slowly across the floor until disappearing into the darkness below. Several people watched it roll without speaking. That tiny marble explained more than any officer's words ever could. I found myself wondering whether future generations would remember this night as numbers printed in books, or whether they would understand that history is built from small moments like that one. A marble rolling where it never should have, a child asking innocent questions, an orchestra refusing to surrender silence to fear. I survived because I followed orders, boarded a lifeboat when instructed, and spent hours watching the great ship become smaller against the stars. I will not describe the final moments because memory has a way of protecting itself, and some images belong to those who were there rather than those who read about them. What I remember most is not the end, but the beginning. That single scraping sound beneath my feet. So quiet, so ordinary. If I close my eyes even now, I can still hear it before I hear anything else. People often ask what it was like to be aboard Titanic, expecting stories of chaos or impossible heroics. I always think instead of that first gentle sound and how easily we accepted it because it did not match our idea of disaster. Sometimes, when I step onto a large ship, even today, I find myself listening to the silence beneath the engines, waiting for a sound so small that everyone else would ignore it. And every now and then, when the sea becomes perfectly calm and the stars reflect on water as smooth as polished glass, I cannot escape the feeling that somewhere below, history is still remembering the night we believed nothing could happen until something almost too quiet to notice changed everything.